I'm excited this morning or afternoon to kick off the mentorship series for this February. And today we're starting by hearing from Greg, the owner of Lewis and Clark Lake Vineyard in Yankton, and he's going to share about grapevine pruning and grapevine trunk disease. And so I'll turn it over to you for your presentation, Greg.
Okay, Morgan, thank you, and welcome to anybody who's viewing this now or sometime in the future. It's February 4th, 2025 at noon, and we're going through a brief overview of through the year grapevine production, but specifically today it's about pruning because that's, in my view, the most important aspect of the whole year. Get your pruning done properly, on time, and in the proper manner, and everything flows from there. And if you do it incorrectly, you're going to have problems. So this is a view of our vineyard. We have about 40 acres. This is not in, there's an additional couple acres in through here. And this part was under net whenever this was taken. And so that would mean it's about August 1st every year we have that. When we bought this land, there was just plain farmland up here, corn and soybeans. And as you can see, all the houses, we've had some incursion. The person who sold it to us retained the perimeter, developed it, so we have to live with that. But it's about 40 acres total. We purchased this land in 1985. It's about 3/4 mile from the Lewis and Clark Lake, the dam on the Missouri River. Planted grapes in 1987 for farmers market sale. And when Governor Jankel signed the farm winery law into effect on June 1, 1996, we were approached immediately by several potential wineries to plant grapes. So in 1998, we planted Frontenac. And then we have since 2015 changed from using conventional practices to converting over to biodynamic and Korean natural farming, organic viticulture, although we're not certified. If you look at this, this is the winter pruning kit that I use, and I don't even carry this big pruner, but you'll notice that these are anvil pruners, not the typical bypass pruner. When I go out to prune, I typically only carry this hand pruner and this tungsten carbide sharpener, which is just the best. These are Lowe, L-O-W-E-E, pronounced Lowe, little hand pruner for when you have big stuff to cut. This is a view from our house, and that's the lake down in the far distance. This shot was taken in 2019 when we actually had snow on the ground, and we have no snow on the ground this whole winter. I don't ever remember anything like this. Here's our vineyard, a typical shot of a vineyard, not our specific vineyard, but it's what you'd call a sprawl system. We've got, I'll show you later, canes that go down and up. So we have a kind of a combination vertical shoot position and high cordon. And so we have our main cordon wire at 48 inches. I started out at 60, but when I got too old, that that really takes its toll on things. So I decided enough is enough. Now I'm going to get out of this one and get into my other screen. This was a study done by University of Minnesota, presented by the extensions of University of Minnesota, University of Wisconsin, and a few years ago, 2012, or excuse me, 2022. Yeah, published on June 3rd, 2022. This is the title for the record, and these are the principal presenters involved with this. On grapevine trunk disease, I will say that all the YouTube videos I've seen in literature, it's always about botrytis or a bot canker, it's called. And in this case, they took cross sections of from 34 vineyards in the Wisconsin and Minnesota area, and they found that 32 out of 34 vineyards had a pretty large infestation of grapevine fungal trunk diseases. And it was pretty amazing. Now here, you'll see a view, just for reference, where my cursor is under item H, that's a clear trunk. It looks clean, the xylem is there, it's a dark pith, but that's normal. If you look at D, just above it, this shows you what happens to a lot of vines. What you have to notice about this isn't the new growth, but it's all of this growth right along here that isn't there. Those cordons, the trunk here and the cordon left and cordon right, they're dead. And the vine reacted, it's got all those cytokinin hormones in the roots during the wintertime. When it grew that next year, all this growth, you can see how it's pretty easy to reestablish, but it's because this thing died. Now, botrytis furia, which is what most people think of as grapevine trunk disease, because that is pretty well known to attack vinifera. You'll notice that there's none of that wedge-shaped, it would be a pie-shaped wedge that occurs, a discoloration. But here you can see some of these other diseases that attack a grapevine, and it generally is a splaying out, a radial. Here's some something like esca, a wood rot in the middle, and this is a pretty big problem. This is what they found on most cordons of the samples they got, were this kind of cross-sectional brown rot and such. Now, this is the area of the study. You can see it was Minnesota, Wisconsin, 34 vineyards. Here's the surprise. It's just drops your jaw, is how by proportion, by diameter, what particular species or taxa of fungi that are attacking the vineyards in Minnesota and Wisconsin. So that means in South Dakota would be the same. By proportion, CY is cytospora, and or cytospora, excuse me. That's that fungus on agar plates. The pH is phaeoacrymonium, and this is alternarium and fusarium. And the one that I thought was commonly seen was botrytis furia. That's this one. Proportionally, only 2 or 3 samples out of the hundreds that were taken actually had botrytis furia infection and penicillin. And so now that I butchered all of these, I'll stop the share and get back to the original. That's what I just looked at, was what grapevine trunk diseases actually occur in the vineyards in this region, not in California. So here's a video of general walkabout of Lewis Clark Vineyard just recently, showing you general comments about winter pruning in our vineyard. So I'll play that now. The walk in the vineyard, this is in Rihanna. It's one of the few that survived our big hit, dicamba. So this is pruning that is about to happen. See, this trunk was once upon a time cut off and replacement renewal shot up above, and it's quite a mess right now, but it's part of the recovery process. You see how long some of these canes are. This is probably goes all the way clear up here and down here, at least 10 feet. That's pretty typical. This happens to be at the end. And so it'd be obviously the apical dominant. That's where I cut it off last year. You notice how I have this stub. It's about 2 or 3 inches long. I always cut off. I have a node to cut off right in this space right here. I never cut right next to the node. as dangerous for disease spread. This is a 1-year-old cane, so I'd probably cut about right here and leave a nice long gap, 3 inches. But here's one where I didn't cut right in the curve. I didn't remove that one, but this one should be okay down here. So I'd have to remove this particular one. And you'll notice that this one has reasonable growth and development of the canes. And some more. You can see my wire system. This cordon height is about 4 feet from the ground. Then I have about 3 feet above it, a few wires to catch. And notice how the canes seem to naturally want to climb in the air. I never ever thought that was possible with any of these canes, but they do seem to do that. So what I do, I can have my density of canes rather than 5 per foot of canes, I can go 7 or 8 because I get a lot of these that grow up. Here's the 2-bud spur. And so they grow up and some naturally grow down, as you can see right here. And this one's down, but this one is up. And that's just a natural way. Now, as I get more dense, the nice part about this is I'll just be able to take this one if I want and just pull it down if I think it's too dense in that particular area. As you can see over here, this cane was, and it goes 10, 12 feet that way to the west, to the south. And it went down, so it didn't crowd into these above that came up above. So it seems to work out pretty well. I did this because of, I've noticed in the past 10 years, I used to have Geneva double curtain. And it was always a difficulty trying to, the buds needed to be exposed in order to have some decent chance of ripening. And it just turns out that our weather has warmed up so much, these canes naturally ripen. So here's a natural growth development, canes coming out at every node. I had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 nodes instead of six, which is the standard in normal first year development. But this is a 1/2 inch, so that's about what this diameter is. And that's what it does. When it wants to grow naturally, the canes seem to develop, this one going up and this one down, up and down, and so on. And this one goes along the length. When you have anything that grows up, the cane diameter is much stronger and about twice as long, so it's a larger diameter. And that just seems to be the way it is. Here's the cane that's a good 1/2 inch diameter that came off of the end right here. And up it goes and stops at infinity almost. But it's a few examples of development in a vineyard. And here you can see I'm replacing an old trunk that has got some old bad pruning habits, something like this that was cut off to pretty it up, but it's just too close. You notice that I leave stubs like this now, and then in the first year you cut it off at 2 inches, and then the next year you come through and cut that off. But I leave one that in this replacement coming up like this, and this one is a replacement from last year, and I'll lay 2 down and probably cut this off right here and lay this down. I'll lay 5, 6 down. This one's a bit too small, but we'll go from there. See it in the setting sun. The canes, generally in this case, I let them grow upward. And if I want to, if I think the density is too thick, I'll just simply pull down and pull down like this. And there you have it. that will be a natural skirt out here under, when it gets the leaves and the blossoms on, and then some will go up. You can get your density a lot thicker than by the book, for sure. And you can see the density through here is pretty decent, more than 5 per foot. But that's okay, because some of these are going down and some up, and I can always put it down like that. And leave it so I can leave. Well, this is the first full cropping here. That big fall. So that's what happens in life. And here's an example where I cleaned the curve of the new cane. And so I got a nice shoot there, shoot, and a shoot, and a shoot. I left 5 here, and this one's going down. So you can see that it really, this is an elbow to fist distance that basically is about 15 to 16 inches, 5, 6 nodes typically. And that's how you get pretty nice development of each node. But you can see here that the tip for sure has a cane that goes 15 feet, and it's twice the diameter of these others. That's apical dominance. Auxins release. This one shoots out first at the tip. Notice the stub again that I cut off from last year. When I come back here, I'll clean this off, and I'll count this out here, lay it down. I'll probably have 5 or 6 nodes extension, lay it down, and all the rest of these I'll leave 2, 2, 2, 2, and leave this one. Always have something down below. I'll leave 1 here and clean these up, and I'll leave this one with 2, and that way I always have something coming up from below to rise up to make it work. More young canes that are freshly developed from last year in the recovery period. Signing off. And the one thing about this that you'll notice, hear me say about leaving stubs, you'll see that in all these videos that are to come. Notice the stubbing, the amount of dead wood beyond the point of growth. That's very important. Secondly, when you're pruning and trying to create a future trellis density, the reason I'm talking about having some canes come up and some down is because you can change how the density occurs for the grape clusters, so that they have more air flowing around them and daylight. So the daylight gets on the sunshine, they ripen better, and they don't have susceptible to disease as much. Then here's one about transitioning an old vine. I picked a really ugly one because everybody's got these in their vineyard. I assume I'm not the only one, but this is a pretty bad worst case scenario. And you'll see what happened as I have a video of this. You'll notice in here for a setup, I've got a cane, a big cane coming up from here. And obviously this cane was 3 years old now, and it had growth out of it. I let growth here. In other words, you want to crop. But watch what I do with this in the next slide, and notice there are several, oh man, 5/8 diameter canes. This thing is loaded to bear, and it's obviously got enough cropping on it to keep it in check. So these canes on to the left here are 15 feet long. I don't cut anything in order to reduce incidence of disease. So the next one will show you what it's about, and then another one will show you what it looks like when you're done pruning, and I'll go over that. My subject right now is proper pruning practices that I learned from Simonite and Cirque from Italy, from many videos and some paid coursework on how to prune when you're terminating something. You can see right here, I'll show you some examples, but you can show this is a short prune stub that was cut pretty close, and there's an inclusion right here that will cause some desiccation inside, but it seems this vine does pretty well. But you notice This was an inch diameter cordon that I decided I wanted to renew. So I left about a 4 or 5 inch stub right here. And then this cane that came out here went along. I have a nice one. Here's another one where I left. Now this was about 1.5 inch diameter. So I cut it off about a good 6 inches from its termination point, and most growers will try to cut it off right there, which is a bad mistake. This is another example of when a stub that came out that was a cordon, and I cut it off about a 2 inch stub, and that's almost too close. But notice that the strength of this cane that came off, that happens to go about 15, 18 feet down that way, that really took the sap and all the nutrients. Now here's the more common method that you use in everyday spur pruning. This is a spur that's developing up, and you can see a little stub right here. That's what I left when I created the spur. Then last year, this cane was quite a bit longer, and I cut it off at mid-node point, the inner node distance between one and the next. I got 2 canes that came off, 2 spurs, that nodes that burst, and notice I still have this stub. Now, this year when I come to prune, you notice I can, because this is desiccated, and this was the size of what it grew to be, and this is how it dried up to be, I can come right down here and remove that and clean that up. And I can also, more importantly, clean up this little stub that was left, because it also too is desiccated, but it served its purpose. And then I would probably take that one off, being careful not to hit the crown buds. And now I've got 2, and I'll keep this one that goes clear out this way as my future cane. And then I prune this one. I will cut this little stub off right there. And the same for this one. I would cut this stub off just flush, because you're safe to do that now. And then because this was developed, and here's another little stub that came out underneath and grew out as a nice, beautiful cane. Goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 nodes. And that seems to be just about right. They didn't have suffered from anything. These canes were all much longer than this. Anything didn't harden off, desiccates off. And so that's the general outlook of how something like this, I would have to, this year I could cut this off, this stub right here that's left as a cordon extension, and replace it with this one. And I can also just leave it. There's no reason why you have to cut these off. The whole reason is this is all sealed up. This wood is all dried. You can see how large the diameter was. And it's about half the size right now, or 2/3 the size. But it is desiccated inside, and it's down to this growth point right here. In a couple of years, it's fully desiccated. And so it can't transmit any disease in this end point here because it's sealed up. So you can just leave this. You don't have to cut it. You can leave it for a couple of years until you get mad if your net catches on it, or just simply because you want to have a pretty vine that you'd clean it up. I gave that up a long time ago. It doesn't really matter much to me. So that's the general philosophy of Seaman and Cirque. And their pruning method: always leave stubs, and always be careful how you prune next to your future growth. All right, so this is what it looks like after I pruned. You probably say, well, you didn't do anything. But of course, the objective is you can notice there that right in this zone, that trunk is cracked. So these points downstream are in trouble, as probably this one. So what I've done is this long cane that was down at the bottom, I left that to 2 nodes, and I left this and we'll extend that. Next year, I'll cut this off about right here with a saw, and I'll lay this down, and this will send 2 beautiful stubs clear up, and I'll pick one of them to lay down this way, and meanwhile, cut this about right here. All of that goes on the ground. This is sometimes what you see in vineyards. Very, very bad practice. They call it benchmarking. If you have a spur and it gets quite long and you've got some growth from the bottom and people want to cut it off, and they'll cut off right like this. The bad thing is that many people have bought electric pruners, and it's so easy to do that. If you have a hand pruner, you'd never ever think twice about doing that because it'd be very hard, and you shouldn't do it. Here's another one, pruning far too close in the spur like that to clean it up, and it's just going to be an entry point for disease. And here's a very, very poor attempt at tidying up. It's easily done with electric pruners, but look at that wound that cannot heal itself. And guess what's going to happen? You're going to have disease enter that wood of the type that the Cytospora and Phaeomyconium and Diaportha and all those.
What's happened?
So here's an assessment of a young developing trunk and cane cordon, and the problem I see across everywhere, all my vineyard and every vineyard I've visited in this region, has got to do what to do with growth in the curved portion of the newly establishing trunk and cordon, this curved area where the cane comes off and goes from the trunk into the cordon wire. That is what should be kept clean. And this is a video showing you what it looks like and what happened.
What's happened is that young tree, this is even an inch diameter, and it comes up into this curved area from the vine where it's coming up to the cordon wire. And notice how thick on both sides these canes are that came out of the nodes. They're in the curved area of the vine. As soon as it gets up here, pencil-sized wood, and then 3 in a row, 4 in a row, pretty short. These are about a foot long. And then at the end, you've got something a little bit longer. This end part is what you call oxen dominated, tip dominated. And these in the middle, you'd think are that way. But I've always been thinking the problem is with these very thick nodes or canes that grew out of the nodes in the curved area that came up to the transition. I've got to make up my mind. I don't know if I should be removing these in the curve, any growth when you go through in May and June to snag everything, or if the real problem is just that at the tip, you have apical dominance, and it's the root, it's the tip shoots that if they get about 2-3 inches long, they're going to start sending back auxins, the plant hormone, that keeps these nodes just behind 3 or 4 from germinating or going very far. Sometimes they certainly don't grow very much, you can see here. And then also they may not even be fruitful. So it's be an interesting story to actually figure this out this year in 2025. Should I be removing these canes, snagging them in May and June before they get too much growth, and letting them, instead of intercepting the nutrients that are coming from the xylem and phloem, and or should I extend this out on the end and simply remove the tip? Because if they get more than 2 inches long, they're certainly going to cause this kind of problem. This is common throughout vineyards all across the region that I've seen. And I do believe this is going to be an interesting year to find that out. What's happened is.
So here's a video on just how I actually prune this. I'm pretty convinced right now that the problem is of allowing anything to grow in this transition, this curved area. You'll see on this one how this trunk this cane right here is larger than the cane from which it came last year. And there's almost nothing going. This is the real problem in my view. And I'm going to find out for sure. There's some subtleties I'll go over later. But let's watch this on how to actually prune your way out of trouble.
Good afternoon again. This is a final pruning video of a vine I previously showed you where we have gained strong growth in the curve of each of the new cordons that were laid down last year. The same on this side. Notice how strong this growth is. It's 5/8 of an inch thick. And then once you get down here, much less strength in the vigor of the buds and growth. And so it's a classic example of having excessively strong growth or any growth in the curve of the trunk, the newly formed trunk that's going to become the cordon. So here's the future trunk, and it was just laid down. So here's how you go about pruning. Starting down here, this is safe. You got another one, and that's still a safe zone. But obviously this one right in this curve should have been pruned out. But look what happened to it. Why, that's as thick as this finger almost. And these, of course, didn't develop. So what I have to do, again, you leave a stub, cut it off here. I just slide this out of the way. And then these below, I can stub off here. And I'll leave 2 nodes here. And I'll cut at the internode distance. Pull that off and out of the way. I'll clean this. And I can come out here a basic elbow to fist, but since these canes are quite vigorous, I can come quite a bit further than 15, 16 inches. So I'll cut it off here and I'll leave 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 nodes instead of 5 or 6. And that way, and I know from experience, this is Frontenac. This variety will do very well on just on that kind of extension. The other side is even more intriguing. There's nothing down below. And then right as you get to the more gentle curve, it's not nearly severe. And I didn't think there'd be a problem. You see very little development of good growth. Now these canes were quite a bit longer, but when they winter kill, they lose some of the length. So we have 2 of them, but you keep in mind, this cane is probably twice the vigor of the other cane, which is higher up on the curve. And so in this case, if they were both equal, I would definitely keep this one and cut this one off at 2 nodes. But in this case, because this is obviously the strong one of the bunch, I am going to keep this one. And again, it's right here in that curve. Up here is the cordon wire. So I'm going to cut this off here, leave a nice stub. And I'll shove this out of the way. And shove this down. And then we'll clean this one up. And because, again, this is 1/2 to 5/8 caliper, I'll come down to here to where it gets about 3/8 and I'll stop. And then I can cut this out of the way and get it out of the way. Then I can pull this down and lay it right down, tie it in there like that. And when I go to tie in, which will be a little bit later, I can shorten this a little bit, but 2, 4, 6, 8. I'll leave it to 8 nodes. And that's the vine pruned when the mistake I made was not coming through to defeather these right through here, especially right in the curve itself. That has got to be taken off. And then because there's a bottleneck right in the curve, that's where the concentration of turgid forces of the sap really concentrate on this curved, the node located in the curve, and boom, they take off. And you can see you've got a lovely cane left here. It will be in production, and then next year I'll be able to carry it on. And since there is no curve to worry about, I probably won't even have to worry about defeathering anything, because this has got all of the vine sap vigor coming to it. And then these two node spurs will provide the gap to fill in this area. And I'll tie this one up and we'll go from there. Have a good day.
So this is that same vine the photo showing after it's been pruned, not tied up yet. I'll make this go more vertical, and I'll put a stake right there, a rebar. Now, what I showed you is so common around all the vineyards I've visited in this region, and I've got to find a final answer, but we'll move on, and maybe next year, if everybody's still around, I can publish my results. Now, this is some examples of from a vineyard in Italy, showing you how when you allow growth to occur in the horizontal, that curved area, the transition from the trunk to the cordon, in time, it chokes out everything downstream, just like I had in that small 2-year-old example. Watch what happens here. What they did was, notice this is the cordon, and none of these nodes are growing. They'll grow weak the first year, almost nothing second year and third year. Now, this is probably a 10-year-old cordon, but all of this growth that only occurred right in the curve, just what I was just talking about. And so here's that curve, and here's this growth coming out. And guess what? All the everything downstream except at the very tip doesn't exist anymore. It's blind. And so here's a recovery period, a method. You've got that nub, that stub right here, and it dominated everything downstream in the original cordon. So they just took something from below. I typically try to have something down here, and then you lay that down. You'll crop it for 1 year, 2 years. You have to keep these alive as so that it's wood that available. Now, what that grower would do this coming year, he'll prune these each to 2 nodes. He'll cut this off about right here on this filled cordon, and we see a lot of that in our region. And he'll try to keep sap flow alive by retaining maybe 1 bud right here, 1 node, and cut everything else off for a couple of years. And that, if you have that sap draw, it's very important. This is what happens when you do it properly. Notice, and he made a special point in his video, keep that nothing growing in that curved area right there, and you'll have good health downstream. And this is what it should look like. Here's acrotony. This is a principle that's used in grape growing, and it's for people who think that they want to delay their pruning in the winter so that they can delay bud break in the spring, or worried about what bud survives, so they leave extra long canes growing. And I'll go through a video that explains what acrotony is and what acrotony is not. People get confused about what this is. And the big reason is that if you use acrotony on high cordon systems in America, most people have the canes on a cordon and they go out and down like that. And unless you have that vine growing vertically, acrotony will not work, and you won't have the kind of delayed bud break that you thought you were going to get. You will get some, but it violates the principle unless you have these canes going upright. So here's a video showing what acrotony is and why you do it. Delaying bud break is principally why people do it in this region.
subject of this video is how to achieve delayed dormancy pruning to protect against frost events that occur, or for winter hardiness, which isn't quite so much a problem that we have here in South Dakota. I'll bring in closer, and the idea is that during these dormant periods, these vines are all being controlled their hormones by a term called acrotony, ACROTONY. It's hormone dependent, already stored in the buds that are up there. And as opposed to apical dominance, which occurs once the shoots start growing. The idea is that for every cane that grows, you should have something in order to take advantage of acrotony. This is a distance of here, and you should say about 6 or 8 buds nodes that you leave. And so I just pick a spot, and every vertical vine I cut like this, this. What I'm going for is a plateau where I have 6 or 8 nodes, and I'll just cut it off there, but you can keep going here and here, and on you go. So what you're seeing here is I have a whole series of canes that are cut at about 6 to 8, I say 8 nodes above the base, and they're all tabletop. And people would do this with a horizontal mower. They'll come through and pre-cut, pre-prune, and then when you're done with that, you've got all this growth out of the way, and just a lot simpler method of getting that final pruning, which has to occur at a specific time of life, time of the season. Acrotony says that if you have these canes going vertically and you have them up at 6 to 8 nodes, you will let these tip buds start growing in the spring. So these ones clear up here, and those down there will remain dormant. And they'll remain dormant for a long time. And so once you get enough growing degree days, these buds start growing, and you'll have what the French call grapevine tears. And that allows this bud to come out and this bud to come out. It'll start shooting out full leaf, then 2 leaves, and so on. But meanwhile, down here at the base, you've got dormancy. They haven't broken dormancy yet. But up here, if you have 6 or 8 buds up, you'll have these shooting out. You have to be careful not to get them too long, or then that will induce not acrotony, but apical dominance, and the auxins that are going to come into play will start filtering right back down by gravity, and it will delay a dormancy break of this bud, if not outright make it infertile by even affecting the flower bud in here. So that's the general idea. I'll talk more about it in general, but this is a method that people use, ironically, in this time of global warming. We are blessed with many warm spells in January, February that are just not kind to us. And when that happens, they accumulate growing degree days, and at a certain point, these buds are going to grow. And so if you want to help control when the basal buds start wanting to grow, which this is where your money is, this bud here and this bud here, then you let this grow out the tip, and then at grapevine tears point, when it's really bleeding badly, when you cut it, then you'll cut right here, and that's what you're left. Then these will break out and hopefully not be damaged by acrotony or apical dominance. This will delay break of these buds by 6 or 8 days, and in some cases a lot longer than that. So it's a worthwhile thing. But of course, in a vineyard, that's, how many dozens and dozens of rows, 600 feet long. I can't abide by this action. Doesn't make any sense for me. So I'll just go ahead and prune like this right away and hope for the best. But the advent of global warming is a sin because it warms things up so quickly, and then you get a sudden cold spell, and meanwhile the buds have already burst, and once you have a 2 or 3 leaves out, your vines are really susceptible to cold snaps, and that's why it's a process that can be used if you're small enough or have enough people to help get to the final pruning. Boom, 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 boom. Also, and it goes pretty quickly. But if you have an acre, you can get that done in time. If you wait too long, then you're really going to get in trouble because these basal nodes will be unfruitful or actually fully dormant and never break out. End of story for crotony and delayed pruning for frost control and grapevines.
This is what a crotony looks like after you're done pruning. And I'll leave this particular one in place just for the heck of it. It isn't my typical pruning, but I just have to remember to come back to it. But you can see how if you had this done this way with a mechanical hedger on top and cleaned up with, notice the stubs that I leave everywhere, then you can come along and by hand, you can get this done pretty quickly in the spring. But I'm not sure anybody I know is clairvoyant enough to know when you're going to have to worry about spring frost delays because our weather is so unpredictable. It's just about all you can count on. So here's how you prune young vines. We'll all have to deal with this. This is the last one of my videos. Has to deal with vines that didn't make it the grade. The general rule of thumb is this is a 3/8 rebar. Anything you save for a trunk for the future has to be 3/8 during the dormant season. It had to have grown that much in the past. And at that point, then you can save it, whether it's down here or up here. But obviously, some of these will show they aren't. This is an example of no, and the other one in the same video is, and you can see how that's handled.
Subject of this video is how to deal with younger vines that have not yet reached to the top of the trellis for the cordon wire. I've got 2 vines, one over there, one here, and last year I left 2 nodes, 2 buds, and cut it all down below. This one, you can't tell probably, but it is not. This is a 3/8 diameter rod, and you'd like to have a trunk that's at least that diameter. And of course it isn't. And so I'm going to cut this one off, flush. I'll cut the stub like that. And I can't quite reach it, but then I'll leave 1, 2 nodes and cut it and get rid of it. And that's what's left of for next year, for this coming spring. That's what will grow. You'll have growth point here at this node and here at this node, and you'll typically save just 1. Now, we've got a little different story here, vine right next door to it, and it grew better. It grew up over here, so I got a 10-foot growth that came out. And the idea is, I know I'm going to save this cane right here, so I'm going to stub that little shoot extension that I kept from last year. And I'm going to take that stub off as well. And then this cane right here has got to go. And I'm going to save him. And then I can save something that is these laterals you cut off. Now, the idea in a trunk is you got to save something that's at least 3/8 diameter. And that typically might qualify up here. Cut this off, cut the tendril, cut the lateral. Don't try to grow off these laterals even if they're big. And I got another lateral up here, and I can cut this off to the lateral. Now, there's two options you have with this vine. It's at least 3/8 diameter right here. And if I wanted to, I could cut it off right here, right at my cordon wire, and leave that down below. You can see they're all 3/8 diameter, so it's pretty good. Or I could come up here and cut right here. And then that means that I can make this, because it's the right kind of caliper, I can make this vine go up to the cordon wire and across for 3 or 4 nodes. Remember, I'm always going to clean the one node that's in the curve, so that one wouldn't count. So I have actually 4 along here that would count, and they're good enough diameter that you could leave that one. Then next year during the growing season, one of these 2 nodes down here will burst, and that will just go straight upright. You don't need to do much with it. Then next year, next training season, you'll pull it down and lay it along the cordon wire and lay it in there like this, and away you go. So that's a finished vine. 2 different tales of how they handle themselves right adjacent to each other. This one, which did quite well, and that one, which needed to be cut back to 2 nodes from the ground. You just should never disobey that rule. Doesn't do any good to save a cane that goes clear up to here and wind that, because they're never going to grow much up there. It just delays the system for a while. This one, of course, could have been cut off right here, just below the cordon wire, never at the cordon wire, because you want growth from down foot below the cordon wire to come up to go horizontal each way when it's time. End of story.
All right, so this is what it looks like on that last one I did. How that looks like when it's tied up, it's vertical, it's tied in. Now, I don't usually tie when I prune. I prune everything. Then when I'm done, the bleeding of sap has not occurred. I usually finish up before March 1st with my 17 acres. So I work all winter every day. And that way I don't have to worry about all the carbohydrates that come, the sugars and minerals that are stored in the roots. When it's time in the spring, when the pressure builds up, the vines have sealed since they haven't been pruned recently, and so there's no loss of sap, very, very little. And that way, all of that, those carbohydrates go into each of these buds and nodes, and to me, it's a big deal. I do not like to see grape vine bleeding. Okay, so now we'll go into examples of what happens when you do get disease, what it looks like. This is an example of a healthy spur. This was a cordon right here, and you can see it come up. There was a little inclusion that occurred during this first transition year, and the same this side. But notice that any of this cream colored wood, that is wood that's sending sap and carbohydrates and then through the xylem and through the phloem right up into the spur unencumbered. Now here's another one showing a narrow band of discoloration in the pith, but notice this inclusion right here that occurred when it was overbent or split from wind damage, and it healed back up, but you're having clear path of sap to the spur, so you're in good shape. This was just done by using a handsaw in a vise. Now, here's a bad one. Bad pruning habits. This is an example of pruning wound desiccation. Yeah, there could be disease in here, but the desiccation is typically a cone-shaped browning of the wood. And when you leave a stub up here, then you've got a chance. that it will stop right here. It will stop desiccating. And what's happened when when you prune too closely, it's a large wound and it can't heal itself. Disease is very likely to get in there. But in this case, we know that wood like this will dry up or desiccate and extend like a cone down into the trunk. And if you had that clear up here a foot away, something this size, then that would have stopped here and you'd have a wide open vascular system to get to the trunk that I really wanted to save. Here's a close-up of what that looks like. It's a desiccation. It's probably what you see most often in a vineyard of what improper pruning will do, because disease progression is actually very slow. This could have occurred in 2 years easily, or even the same year, but disease progresses a quarter inch a month. It isn't very rapid, but this desiccation definitely hurts any sap flow going up to this side. Now here's what happened in overnight. Winter temperature got down 2 degrees Fahrenheit on November 5th in 2018. This was the crescent. We had also had these vines hit with dicamba spray damage, and you can see the cracks that occurred. I started pruning this. There was a pretty heavy snowfall, and I noticed that the wood was really hard to prune. And I got to looking down, and this is what I saw. So you can see how it's split and a knobby growth, again, from improper pruning. So I have a saw, reciprocal saw. I now use a chainsaw, and I cut it off at this point right here. And I happen to have saved a replacement trunk, so that's why it was safe to do that. And this is what that saw cut looks like. It's pretty clearly got some kind of discoloration due to grapevine trunk disease that entered through that part right there, that knobby part. Here's the recovery mode of trying to replace it. You can see how it wants to grow out, and you let it get kind of sprawly, and then you be careful what you select. And so here is a trunk that's split. I cut it about 8 inches above this point. I saved that cane and this cane. These are first year canes from last year's growth. They'll be viable. I'll just have to be careful about how I bend them in place, but here's the cordon wire. Here's a knobby, bad one. You know that that trunk is very well compromised. When you see things like this, you're going to have to cut that off down here. And when you cut it, make sure you don't have any discoloration in that, because if you do, the disease has progressed and you haven't stopped it. You might be able to carry the cordon like this one more year, but you correct your system by pulling canes up from the bottom below this point and training that up, much like this cane right here. Be mindful of that you're not going to carry this much longer. Here's a pruning wound on a Frontenac, great opportunity. A vine can't heal itself well enough and it's too close. Desiccation is going to occur for sure and impede right inside the trunk. This is what that looks like inside. You notice this desiccation look like is not desiccation. It's got slight cracks. That's grapevine trunk disease. It's caused by entry into a stub wound that is cut too close. Here's some rotted wood in the middle the way it looks, but that would not be a desiccation or a cone-shaped discoloration. That's a grapevine trunk disease. Here's a sunken canker, and this is what it looks like inside. That actually regressed. That discoloration is from a progression of grapevine trunk disease going down toward the base. You have to cut it off below there. And that's a close-up of what that looks like. All of this wood will not transmit, will block all the carbohydrates coming from the root upwards, and all the carbohydrates from the phloem that's redistributed among the vine. It's all blocked right there. You're done for. Here's a 4-year-old bronze spur developed as a cordon renewal. That's what it'll look like. You notice the sap flow flowing up to it. You're in good shape, even despite this inclusion here. You still got great sap flow up, and that's that's what you're looking for. And that's a close-up of it. Pith is darkened, but still viable. Splits and trunks, I think we've probably all seen that. You cannot save a trunk like that by, even if you have some growth. I've tried that. And up on the cordon, this is the trunk about a foot above the ground. And the trunk stops, it's split right to the pith, to the core, which means the xylem is compromised, no carbohydrate and water flow. If you don't have water flow, you don't have photosynthesis, your vine is dead. What I've seen happen is vines grow out and they get weak, the canes shoot out, then they quickly stop growth and they'll actually desiccate and die. And so you cannot have any choice. You have to cut below the trunk split like that. Here's what the French use in some cases, a palissage method. They don't prune, so you don't have to worry about trunk disease or disease developing. And also, if you prune, you create a lot of lateral growth further down, which causes shading. That's a really bad scenario. So if you have a top wire like I do, I just wrap them around like that and let them grow. Once they get up there in that top wire, they just keep growing along the wire. They'll go 20 feet, 15 feet. It's all carbohydrate for ripening, so I don't mind a bit. So best pruning practices I learned were from Simonite and Cirque in Italy. I paid for courses and actually had some video demonstrations. Fritz Westhover is a real gem in America, Virtual Viticulture Academy. He's outstanding, really knows what he's talking about. He works almost exclusively with vinifera, and almost everybody down there uses fungicides, and I'm Korean natural farming, so I don't use that. But my advice to you is renew your cordons and new canes more often than probably what your current practice is. That's what I see in seeing other vineyards. Cold climate viticulture requires best practices than what you might see in California or vineyards in Italy. It's nice to see, but their rules do not apply to our rules. And here, for a screenshot, virtualviticultureacademy.com, it's about $500 a year, but you can get personalized advice. You can send videos. Fritz will personally talk to you. He's outstanding. I would just see what he is up to. And Simonite eSearch in Italy, they started out they were in demand because vineyards in the great old growths in France and Italy were losing 5 or 10% of vines every year to grapevine trunk disease. Poor habits. These people have turned that around in Europe, and still a lot of work ahead, but they're in America too. But here's a good resource. So if there's any questions, Morgan?
I don't see any questions at the moment.
Okay.
I know that we had allotted a few minutes for a Q&A on the Korean natural farming
Yeah.
portion of your operation. And when I post this video and send it to the group members that couldn't make it today, I'm going to share the video that we made in September when
Yeah.
we were out at your vineyard that walks
Yeah.
through more of Greg's operation as well as the Korean natural farming. But is there anything that you want to add on that front?
I have just a 5 slide thing on information on that, but if I stop sharing, I'm probably going to lose it, but I guess that'd be okay. I can get back in and I'll bring that up. It's information on what was on the sheets on sourcing. So I think it'd be a good idea to capture that.
Okay. We are a little bit running towards the end, but I have a few extra minutes if we want to try to get through it.
Okay, yeah. This is Korean natural farming at our vineyard. I'm going to share the screenshots with you, not to go over every one of them, but these are all some variation on natural farming. Here's Jadam, here's spice composting that they're using in Australia, and some YouTube. Soilworks has some excellent. They happen to be local. Dr. Lane's Soil Food Web. I took their course. It's expensive, but there's no going back. Here's another one on Chris Trump is the American godfather. He's not that old, but he was at a macadamia orchard in Hawaii, and he's a how-to guy par excellence. Bear Mountain Farm, they really, as a husband and wife team, they are worth looking at. They combine both Jadam, which was a system developed by the son of the person who proliferated Korean natural farming, and they're worth looking at. Bear Mountain is a good proliferation. They explain things very well. Korean natural farming is about indigenous microbes. I have a system that I use like this. That white mold is what's growing in your area, and that's what it's all about. This is how you use it, either in 1 in 500 dilution or 1 in 1,000 dilution of products that you make in your vineyard, on your farm. And it takes about a year to really get up to it, and you can't buy this stuff. But this is something that if you have it on your screen, you'll be able to look at it, and there's resources. Here's Jadam. It's a book that was made by the son of the original show who developed Korean natural farming in the modern sense with books. And I liken it a lot to like biodynamics. They both require a lot of personal research and commitment. You got to start the journey in the midwinter is really a nice time to do it. And it's going to take years to get your feet on the ground to get confidence, but you won't look back in the old ways. And that's the end of it all. Okay, I guess that finishes the webinar. Morgan?
Yeah, it does. And I thought that was really nice how you included the videos of you actually out in the vineyard doing things. That was
Yeah.
really great idea and great presentation. So thank you for taking the time to join today and to put all of that together.